Hello. So I'm Mohammed Ombadi, a PhD candidate at University of California, Irvine. And the work I'll be presenting today is related to my research on using causal inference methods for addressing a wide range of problems in hydrometeorology. What I will do first is to clearly explain what I mean by the two terms, system identification and causal inference, before proceeding to the results. So I'll start with this simple hydrological bucket model that you see, and I will be using it as a running example throughout my presentation. So it consists of four variables: R, which is rainfall; S is a storage variable; and I is an outgoing flux; Q is an excess rainfall. The evolution of the system variables is described by the set of equations that you see here. And the goal of system identification, or what I mean by system identification, is defining the arguments in each one of these functions. So for equation one, we want to know that R and I are arguments or causal factors of variable S, and so forth. And we are less interested in the functional forms of these relationships or their parameters. So this is the goal of system identification in this meaning. And as you can see, the matter of system identification is essentially a causal inference problem, because we are interested in what are the causal factors that are influencing each variable. Okay, so indeed, if we look at the same model, we see that we can identify the system with a causal network that consists of nodes and edges. So each node represents a variable, and each directed edge represents a direct causal impact from one variable to another. So what is a causal inference method? A causal inference method basically takes as an input time series observations, performs a series of operations and processes that varies according to the method, and then outputs a causal network that ideally is the true causal structure of the system that generated the data. So there is a plethora of causal inference methods, and the list I'm showing here is by no means inclusive. However, it shows a broad classification of the methods that we have. So there is Granger causality, which perhaps the earliest and most fundamental. Then for transfer entropy, which is the information theoretic analog of Granger causality, and convergent cross-mapping, which is based on theories of nonlinear state space, and then PC algorithm, which is a perfect archetype of causal network algorithms. So each of these methods relies on a set of assumptions, which I'm not going to discuss because of time constraints. But what I want to say here is that all of these methods, except convergent cross-mapping, are based on an assumption of stochastic processes. Convergent cross-mapping, on the other hand, is based on an assumption of deterministic processes. So keep that in mind. And these are the methods that I used in my experiment, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But before that, causal inference methods, although relatively new, have been used successfully in several studies across the geosciences, and I'm showing here a few of those. However, in each of these studies, only a single causal inference method has been used, and there is no clear guidelines on the selection of the methods. So this really has been the impetus of our work to provide a baseline study that intercompare the different causal inference methods. So going back to the same model that I showed earlier, we first force this model with a synthetic rainfall. So we simulate first the rainfall, the occurrence of rainfall as a first order Markov chain model, and then we feed that into a beta distribution to get the rainfall. What we do next is to generate about 100 simulations from the model, each with a relatively long record of 3,000. And what we try to do is to provide these simulations to the algorithms and to see what type of structure we can recover from the simulations. So what you see on the left is the true causal structure of the model. And on the right, panels A to D are the recovered causal structures using each of the methods. And red edges denote mistakenly identified links. So well, there are many conclusions to be drawn here, but the upshot is, first, none of the methods is successful in recovering the true causal structure. Second, it seems that there is a trade-off. So if you look at panels A and D, which is Granger, causality, and CCM, they recover all of the true causal links. However, they show some false positives. And on the other hand, on panels B and C, there is some control over false positives, but they miss some of the true links. So next, we wanted to examine the robustness of the performance to sample length and presence of noise. So what we did is to come up with a set of metrics, specifically true positive rate and false positive rates. And these are just the proportions of correctly and mistakenly identified links averaged across the simulations. So what you see here on the x-axis is the sample length ranging from 100 to 3000. The y-axis shows the true positive rates on the left-hand side. The higher, the better. And on the right-hand side, the false positive rate, which is the lower is the better. So you can see the trade-off that I talked about earlier, but you can also see that convergent cross-mapping in blue is less sensitive to change in sample length. And then for the process noise, we add process noise to the model equations in the form of a Gaussian white noise. So here in the x-axis, you see the noise level expressed as noise to signal ratio. Again, the y-axis on the left shows the true positive rates. On the right-hand side shows the false positive rates. And what you can see here is that the three methods of Granger causality, transfer entropy, and PC are less sensitive to changes in process noise, which is expected because these methods are based on assumptions of stochastic processes. What is surprising, however, is convergent cross-mapping, which is based on deterministic processes, can tolerate some level of process noise, and beyond that level, the performance starts to deteriorate. So we did then the same thing for observational noise, and you can see again CCM is more sensitive as compared to other methods to observational noise. So basically, based on the results that I showed, the results of our experiments, we found that several factors control which methods or which method outperform the others. And some of these factors is sample length. So convergent cross-mapping, as we showed that with a relatively short record can achieve a good performance. And then the type of underlying relationships in the system, whether it is stochastic or deterministic. So if there is a strong stochastic component, then methods like transfer entropy and PC are more preferable. And lastly, the type of or the purpose of a study, whether it is confirmatory or exploratory. So in a confirmatory study where you have already a defined set of relationships that you want to confirm, you would like to control the false positives. And therefore, you might opt to use transfer entropy or PC. What I would like to conclude with is an example of some of the applications that we have been using causal inference methods on. And on this work, we have satellite-based soil moisture data and rainfall data from CPC over the corners. And what you see in the map is the strong of causal impact of soil moisture on rainfall. So all the yellowish areas are regions with a strong causal feedback between soil moisture and rainfall. And now if we compare these results with what is already reported in the literature, this is a work by Randy Koster, where they used an ensemble of land surface models, then you can see there is some resemblance in terms of the spatial distribution of these feedback. So this is just as an example of some of the applications that we have been using causal inference on. And my very last slide is references. So thank you, and yeah, I'll be happy to take questions. Okay, yeah, so the system identification, as I defined it earlier in the presentation, in the way I'm defining it, I'm less interested in the functional forms of the relationships and their parameters. So I'm only interested in defining the causal impacts on each variable. And the argument is the causal network is actually a representation of system identification. So by having the causal network, you already identified the causal variables impacting each variable, and therefore you have some level of system identification. Of course, then you can go further to know more about the functional forms or maybe the value of the parameters. But in this work, I did not do that. But it's possible because you can get the strength of causal links, and therefore it can give you some idea of the value of the parameters. Thank you.
So what you're showing is all positive signals. So you're looking at yes or no answers, right? So there is a causal link for each one. And of course, everything that we do with uncertainty. Why don't we do? Don't you think it would be better to come up with uncertainty estimates for causal strength?
Yeah.
Doing yes no answers.
Yes. That's it. It definitely depends on the type of study, I would say. So in this example that I'm showing as an application, for example, I would argue it is even an important question at the level of a yes or no, because there have been a lot of debate about the existence of the feedbacks, for example. So in this case, it is a yes/no question. But of course, you can always go further, and it is important to add more information about the causal links and about their strength. Yeah, I agree with you. Right.
And so, I was thinking how many latent variables, what is the total number of variables, what's not the area of the system, how Gaussian is your data, because it all matters when you figure out which method you want to use.
Right.
So I think the research is great. I'm just making suggestions and the students going.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. In fact, if I go back to the equations that I have, so I try to incorporate some nonlinearities here. So if you look at the second equation, the storage-discharge relationship is somehow nonlinear. But yeah, and I'm also trying now to add different types of noises, not just the Gaussian, but maybe more challenging autocorrelated noise, and to just have to expand the experiment. But yeah, thank you.
So it seems like each of them, as you're kind of pointing out, are pulling out different structures. They're deciding some have some benefits or some downsides, right? And I was curious, because you kind of pointed out that this one's better than the other one in kind of circumstances.
Right.
It almost feels like there's a way you should just be able to sort of leverage them all together by kind of taking random all? Can you not just do some sort of like, I mean, the naive thing is the averaging the results, kind of see like where connections repeatedly come up as there are here. Those are very likely to actually exist. And the ones that don't come up often are less likely to exist.
Yeah. So actually, if you look at each of those mistakenly identified links or the missed true links, you can actually track those back to the assumptions embedded in each of those methods. So you kind of like know why each of these methods performed in that way. And it is possible that you might combine different methods to get a better answer. That's something actually I've tried. I have tried to combine the PC algorithm with the CCM, with the convergent cross mapping, to kind of like take advantage of the strength of each of the methods. But it is not, it's not straightforward. It's difficult because you need a systematic way to go with that. But yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility because in each of them has a strength, and you should take advantage of that. But you need a very systematic way to do it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, our great speakers today.